until Vanderskamp and his brother merchants would set sail on another trading voyage. The Wild Goose would be shut up and everything relapse into quiet, only to be disturbed by his next visitation.
The mystery of all these proceedings gradually dawned upon the tardy intellects of Communipaw. These were the times of the notorious Captain Kidd, when the American harbors were the resource of the piratical adventurers of all kinds, who under pretext of mercantile voyages scoured the West Indies, made plundering descents upon the Spanish main, visited even the remote Indian seas, and then came to dispose of their booty, have their rebels, and fed out new expeditions in the English colonies.
Vanderskamp had served in this hopeful school, and having risen to importance among the buccaneers, had pitched upon his native village and early home as a quiet, out-of-the-way, unsuspected place, where he and his comrades, while anchored at New York, might have their feasts and concert their plans without molestation.
At length, the attention of the British government was drawn to these piratical enterprises which had become so frequent and outrageous. Vigorous measures were taken to check and punish them. Several of the most noted freebooters were caught and executed. And 3 of Vanderskamp's chosen comrades,
The most riotous swashbucklers of the Wild Goose,
there hanged in chains on Gibbet Island in full sight of their favorite resort. As to Vanderskamp himself, he and his man Pluto had disappeared, and it was hoped by the people of Communipaw that he had fallen in some foreign brawl.
Or been swung on some foreign gallows.
Calm summer evening, a boat, somewhat heavily laden, was seen pulling into Communipaw. What was the surprise and disquiet of the inhabitants to see Jan Jost Vanderskamp seated at the helm, and his man Pluto tugging at the oars. Vanderskamp, however, was apparently an altered man.
You brought home with him a wife who seemed to be a shrew, and to have the upper hand of him.
He was no longer the swaggering, bully ruffian but affected the regular merchant and talked of retiring from business and settling down quietly to pass the rest of his days in his native place.
The Wild Goose Mansion was again open, but with diminished lavish splendor and notoriety. It is true, Vanderskamp had frequent nautical visitors.
The sound of revelry was occasionally overheard in this house.
But everything seemed to be done under the rose.
And old Pluto was the only servant that officiated at these orgies.
The visitors, however, were by no means of the turbulent stamp of their predecessors, but quiet, mysterious traders, full of nods, winks, and hieroglyphic signs, with whom, to use their cant phrase,
Everything was small.
Their ships came to anchor at night in the lower bay. And on a private signal, Vanderskamp would launch his boat,
And accompanied solely by his man Pluto.
would make them mysterious visits.
Sometimes boats pulled in at night in front of the Wild Goose, and various articles of merchandise were landed in the dark and spirited away. Nobody knew whither.
one of the more curious of the inhabitants kept watch and caught a glimpse of the features of some of these night visitors by the casual glance of a lantern, and declared that he recognized more than one of the freebooting frequenters of the Wild Goose of former times, from whence he concluded that Vanderskamp was at his old game, and the mysterious merchandise was nothing more nor less than piratical plunder.
The more charitable opinion, however, was that Vanderskamp and his comrades, having been driven from their old line of business by the oppressions of government, had resorted to smuggling to make both ends meet.
I come now to the extraordinary fact which is the butt end of this story. It happened late one night that Jan-Jas Vanderskamp was returning across the broad bay in his light skiff, rowed by his man Pluto. He had been carousing on board of a vessel, newly arrived, and was somewhat obfuscated in intellect by the liquor he had imbibed. It was a still, sultry night. A heavy mass of lurid clouds was rising in the west, with the low muttering of distant thunder.
Vanderskamp called on Pluto to pull lustily, that they might get home before the gathering storm.
The old Negro made no reply, but shaped his course so as to skirt the rocky shores of Jade Island.
A faint creaking overhead caused Vanderskamp to cast up his eyes when, to his horror, he beheld the bodies of his three pot companions and brothers in iniquity dangling in the moonlight.
Their rags fluttering and their chains creaking.
As they were slowly swung backward and forward by the rising breeze.
What do you mean, you blockhead?
Cried Vanderskamp.
By pulling so close to the island?
I thought that you'd be glad to see your old friends once more.
Growled the Negro.
You were never afraid of a living man. What do you fear from the dead?
Who's afraid?
Hiccupped Vanderskamp, partly heated by liquor, partly nettled by the jeer of the Negro.
Who's afraid? Hang me, but I would be glad to see them once more, alive or dead, at the Wild Goose. Come, my lads in the wind.
Continued he.
Taking a draught and flourishing the bottle above his head.
Here's fair weather to you in the other world. And if you should be walking the rounds tonight, odds fish. But I'll be happy if you will drop into something.
A dismal creaking was the only reply. The wind blew loud and shrill, and as it whistled round the gallows in a number of boats, it sounded as if they were laughing and
Vanderscamp called over.
He was completely sobered by the storm. The water soaked from without, having diluted and cooled the liquor within, arrived at the Wild Goose.
He knocked timidly and dubiously at the door, for he dreaded the reception he was to experience from his wife. He had reason to do so. She met him at the threshold, and a precious ill humor.
Is this a time
Said she,
to keep people out of their beds, to bring home company, to turn the house upside down?
Company?
Said Vanderscamp, meekly.
I have brought no company with me, wife.
No, indeed, they got here before you by your invitation. Blessed looking company they are, truly.
Vanderscamp's knees smote together.
For the love of heaven, where are they, wife?
Where? Why, in the blue room, upstairs, making themselves as much at home as if the house were their own.
Vanderscamp made a desperate effort, scrambled up to the room, and threw open the door.
Sure enough, there at the table, on which burned a light as blue as brimstone, sat the three guests from Gibbet Island.
With halters round their necks. Bobbing their cups together.
As if they were hobnobbing and trolling the old Dutch freebooters' glee.
Since translated into English.
For three merry lads be we, and three merry lads be we. I on the land, and thou on the sand, and Jack on the gallows tree.
Vanderscamp saw and heard no more,
starting back with where he was his foot on the landing place.
and fell from the top of the stairs to the bottom.
He was taken up, speechless.
And either from the fall or the fright was buried in the yard of the little Dutch church at Bergen on the following Sunday.
From that day forward, the fate of the Wild Goose was sealed. It was pronounced a haunted house and avoided accordingly.
No one inhabited it but Vanderscamp's shrew of a widow.
And no Pluto, and they were considered but little better than his hobgoblin visitors.
Pluto grew more and more haggard and morose. He looked more like an imp of darkness than a human being. He went about muttering to himself, or as some hinted, was speaking to the devil, though unseen, was ever at his elbow.
Now and then, he was seen pulling about the bay in his skiff, alone, in dark weather, or at the approach of nightfall.
Nobody could tell why, unless on an errand to invite more guests from the gallows.
Indeed, it was affirmed that the Wild Goose continued to be a house of entertainment for such guests, and that on stormy nights, the Blue Chamber was occasionally illuminated, and the sounds of diabolical merriment were overheard mingling with the howling of the tempest.
With 2 or 3 piercing shrieks that pervaded every part of the village. Nevertheless, no one thought of hastening to the spot.
On the contrary, however, the honest burghers of Communipaw drew their nightcaps over their ears and buried their heads under their bedclothes. At the thought of Vanderskamp and his gallows companions,